How do people like us, with a drive to excel and a belief in our own agency, navigate life's complexities? How do we sift through the vast sea of knowledge to find actionable insights in areas like habits, health, wealth, and relationships? Come with me as I interview intellectuals and all-stars to refine life's ungoogleable lessons. I save you time and effort by finding the best of life's messy questions in this podcast to give you the answers. My name is Blake Bottrell, and this is the Distilled Podcast. My guest today transitioned from shoveling snow off his driveway in rural Alberta to shoveling mangoes off his lawn in rural Nicaragua. He took a brief 25-year pit stop as a strength and conditioning coach all across the USA. After a pedicure almost led to a leg amputation, he realized that strength was only a single piece of the health and wellness puzzle. Today, he lives a slower life, adopting the rituals you might find in one of the world's blue zones, one of which happens to be Nicoya, Costa Rica, less than a 5-hour trip from his front door. Jim Laird, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Could you send me that intro? That's fantastic. I'll pay you for it. That was really good.
So, obviously touched on it there in the intro. Moved down to Nicaragua. What's the expat situation in Nicaragua like? Only because I'm sure there's a good overlap between the type of agentic person that would listen to a podcast like this and the sort of expat or digital nomad that wants to sort of go where they're treated best.
Well, you can find them here. Most of them are in San Juan de Sur. Most of them are in Managua or Leon. Depends on where you go. Granada, where I'm living near now, there's a lot of expats here. So you can find them if you want to be around them, or you can kind of do what I do, which is I was living on a beach. I was planning on building a gym there, but the infrastructure really didn't work out. Wasn't exactly what I was looking for. So I relocated here just recently. I live in a town called Diarmo, which is just outside of Granada. So I'm about 10 or 15 minutes from downtown Granada. Granada's a big colonial city. And so there's tons of expats, there's tons of tourists there. Diarmo, there's no gringos at all. They all stare at me. So it's forcing me to learn Spanish. I really like kind of living off the beaten path, and I live on a small farm. I'm about 5 minutes away from an ATM, from a gas station. Where I was living before, it was about 30 or 40 minutes to the nearest gas station or ATM.
I know you've taken a lot of this direction in your life to specifically try to improve your wellness through the health lens. And I know based on the Harvard study of adult development that a good portion of the longevity of any person is the relationships and the community that they have. So how are you doing your best, obviously knowing all this, to try to get yourself integrated, if at all, into the community down there? Because I know it must have been tough to leave a lot of the friends and community that you did when you left the States.
Tell you what, there's not a day goes by. I had a wonderful community in Lexington, Kentucky, where I owned a gym for a long, long time. I left some incredibly good friends. I still chat with a lot of people. Social media obviously allows me to keep up with a lot of those people. But I've kind of been like this my entire life. Like I moved from Edmonton, Alberta, as you said, to California to play college football. I didn't know one person there when I moved there. I moved from California to Virginia the next year to play football at Liberty University. I didn't know one person there either. Then I moved back and forth from Virginia to Lexington, or Virginia to Aspen, back and forth while I was going to college. Then ended up going out to the University of Arizona to do a graduate assistantship out there. Met Jim Windler there, who wrote the book 531. Ended up moving to Lexington, sleeping on Jim Windler's floor. I didn't know anybody there other than Jim Windler. Spent 20 years there, then ended up moving down to Santa Rosa Beach, where I didn't know anybody. And everywhere I've gone, I've kind of gotten to know new people, and I'm kind of really outgoing in that matter. But here, I just make sure, like, I sponsored the local baseball team in the town I was living as part of, like, getting to know the community. I went out of my way to go to I don't go to like the gringo barber shop. I go to like the local barber shop, which is like a $2 haircut, and they shave my whole head with a straight razor, trim the beard, They've got chickens inside the barbershop. There's 2 cows in the barbershop. The whole family's in the barbershop. It's just local, so I go out of my way to do that. I try to learn the language. I try to put myself out there. I say hello to everybody. I say buenos dias, hola. I really am trying to do that. And then, I'm just lucky. Where I was living before, there was a lot of expats there. So I just went out of my way to make connections and make friends. The business that I'm in is very people connected. Dr. Stillman and I have a business together, or I work for him or with him. And I'm coaching on that all the time. So I'm on calls with people, which is great. But one of the reasons I moved here is so I could go to Granada, go to a restaurant where there's more people to interact with, whereas opposed to where I was living before, it was very remote. So, but even where I was, I got to know a lot of the local people, and I spent time with them, and I went out of my way to where I was living, there was no gas station. So 15 minutes down the road, there's a guy on the side of the road who's literally selling gas in 2-liter pop bottles. And, I pay probably to fill my motorcycle up. I was paying probably $11 to fill my bike up. Here in Granada, I can fill my bike up for $8, but I would pay him just to go see him, to get to know him, because his family worked for him. They all worked for him, and they ran a store there. So I would on purpose go to those stores and spend my money there. Instead of driving 30 minutes down the road and getting my gas for, $8, I would get to know him and his family. So I go out of my way to do that.
What's the biggest lesson you've taken away from moving a lot of those potential relationships from what many people would think a friendship is, of sending a few Facebook messages back and forth, to getting to know the locals? That gas in the pop bottle story is very reminiscent of a lot of things that I saw in rural Bali when I took my trip to Southeast Asia in 2017. Cool. And you just driving through the countryside, and there's just a guy with a little hut on the side of the road, and he's got his bike pulled up, and there's a little cart on the back of the bike, and there's some local fruit, and he's got the pop bottles with the gas in it. What's that transition been like for you?
Really, it hasn't been that hard, because I've really been this way my whole life. I've kind of been that drifter. Like, I'm that guy that goes on vacation by himself on a cruise ship, and I sit at the table and eat my dinner by myself, because I'm owning a gym and doing group training for years and years and years. I literally didn't get a lot of time to myself. And so I would go on vacations by myself. One of my favorite vacations was to rent a motorcycle, and I would drive I would fly to Vegas, stay in Vegas for one night, get a motorcycle, drive, down Route 66 up to the Grand Canyon, then up to Bryce Canyon, and then what's the other national park up there? There's Bryce, and then there's I can't remember the name of the other one, but and then you go down through Valley of the Fire, come back to Vegas. I did stuff like go through Colorado, do Independence Pass, Death Valley, California. Those are all things I would do by myself. I do that here in Nicaragua too. The other day I drove up one of the volcanoes by myself. That's just kind of how I've been wired. I've done a lot of things by myself, but I'm also very social at the other extreme too. And I've noticed that when I move around, usually there's 1 or 2 people in each town that really I connect with. I've got a handful of friends that I don't talk to as much as I'd like to, but I know I can call them right now and ask, for help or a favor or talk to them. There's going to be a good 5 people in your life that are like your go-to people, right? And that's the one thing I've learned. You meet new people in every town, and there'll be a couple of them that'll stick with you. And then, it's just, I really like the fact that I've kind of moved around and explored. And, like you talked about the being in Asia, here, there'll be a guy herding cows on the side of the road, riding a horse, and I'll pull over and just start talking to him, or because I had Florida plates, I drove down here. I got rid of don't tell anybody, but I got rid of my truck. It's now a golf cart at a resort. But people would walk up to me, Florida. Oh, Florida, you're from Florida. And they would talk, and I would go, Google Translate, and we would talk back and forth. And I just would take the time to talk to people and say hi and ask questions. And most of the people here in Nicaragua are very friendly and outgoing. They'll come up and talk to you. Some of them are not. But I just like it. I enjoy it. I enjoy meeting new people. I enjoy going to new places. I get to ride motorcycle on curvy roads every day. And, I literally get to eat, I've got probably 400 mangoes in my front yard right now. So, I I walk outside every morning and go get in the pool and do some, running in the pool and play catch with my dog in the mango trees and the passion fruit trees and right in front of a volcano. I mean, I couldn't ask for things to be much, much better, really.
You've made a lot of intentional sacrifices or transitions or however you want to frame that in your life to live the life that you do now. And it seems like you have this insane understanding of knowing what you want to want. How do you think you arrived at that?
That's a good question. There are some things that I think as I get older, I think family is something that it would have been nice for me to maybe develop. But I didn't have that skill set because of my early upbringing. So I chose intentionally not to go down that road. So I think that's something that maybe looking back, but I'm a guy. So at 50 years of age, I could still go down that road if I want to, but I don't know. I like my freedom. I like traveling. Part of this is because I was getting away from certain things in the West and Western culture that I just don't like, particularly the invasion of my health freedom. I want a simpler life. A lot of it is basically going where I'm treated best, as you said in the intro, going where my money actually goes somewhere and doesn't disappear. Like I can eat like I had this morning, I had probably half a pound of really good ground beef. I had 2 eggs, fresh avocados off the tree, fresh mangoes off the tree, lime in the mangoes and limes and avocado, and a little bit of potato. I think the total cost of that was like $4, maybe $3.50, $4 total. That in the United States right now would cost you probably $20, so that's a big part of it too. I mean, I have a housekeeper. You would die. I'm paying her very generously, but it's still ridiculously. I pay $2 for my haircut, and I give the guy like it's 50 Cordoba essentially. I try to give him another 50 Cordoba. They'll refuse, and then I'll just go give it to his kid. I'll give the other 50 to his kid. So the cost of living here is insanely cheap. Particularly if you aren't in the tourist areas. So that was a big part of my move too. The big part, honestly, was the health freedom. I wanted to go somewhere where I could mind my own business, where the government didn't have the technology to get into my business. I mean, they still do now, but where I'm getting more real food. The food is real. It's not so processed. Simpler life, less technology. That was a big part of what I wanted to do, and I've done it. And the thing is, though, one of the reasons I moved is I always would think I had a farm in Kentucky during the beer bug. I lived on a farm and I lived out in the middle of nowhere. And you would think like no Wi-Fi, no EMF, all this stuff. I struggled. It was bad. It was really bad. And because I was so isolated, because it was during COVID or COVIDs or beer bug or whatever you call it, I struggled. And then moving here, when I moved to this place that I was at, it was very remote. I liked it at first, but then as I was there for longer, I was like, there's not enough people here and there's not enough things to do nearby. So now I've kind of found that I really need to be near a bigger city and I really need to have a little more social interaction. So, I'm learning as I go, but I just wanted a simple life and I wanted to be, a lot of people are really confused about Nicaragua, but I wanted to be in a country that hasn't lost its mind, a country that still knows the difference between men and women, a country that still values the family. A country that still values older people, that hasn't completely gone insane. And so that's why I'm here.
I think there's definitely a good amount of people that are sort of envious of that transition to a simpler life. A big thing for me, I was going to move on, so if you got another point there.
There's some people that are envious, and there's other people that are like, you're a coward. How dare you? Like you left you left your home, Canada, the United States, you left. But it's like being in a bad relationship. Like, really? Or you're going to stick it out even though you don't like everything. You don't like anything that's going on. You don't like the foreign policy. You don't like the way the West treats other countries in the world. You don't like the banking system. You don't like any of that stuff. Why would you stick around and bang your head against the wall? If you're in a bad relationship and you're being treated poorly and your wealth is being inflated away, if someone's treating you bad in a relationship, why do you stick around? It's your individual choice. And my choice was to go somewhere where my money goes further and I have more freedom to do what I want.
My big thing this year has sort of been, since I heard the metaphor, is stop tripping over dollars to pick up pennies. And I use that to the metaphor to analogize. I think a lot of people focus on whatever it is they want to focus on, supplements, you name it, versus just getting sleep, doing a small modicum of exercise and eating 80% whole foods. But the more I get down this sort of rabbit hole, the more I realize that we can sort of stack up enough pennies to make another dollar on its own. And I was wondering, in your opinion, because I know you've gone through a handful of these things, where are the pennies that we should actually be paying more attention to and picking those up along the way?
Well, the low-hanging fruit is what back in 1960, 1970 happened automatically every day of your life. You spent the majority of your time outside. You had good social connection. You weren't in front of a screen all day. You did manual labor. You mowed your grass. You were outside. You went to the beach. These are all things. You did manual labor. You didn't have this low-level chronic stress all day. These are all things that people just did in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that just happened naturally. We've created this world of ultimate comfort where food is delivered to your door. You don't have to do anything at all anymore. And we've replaced low-level manual labor with high-level doom scrolling and chronic stress. And then we've got people that are trying to build their house with nails. I would say nails are like TRT, peptides, fancy testing, fancy supplement protocols. Those are all great. They all have their place. The problem is if you don't have that root foundation, Dr. Stillman and I call it the 5 fundamental habits. Walk outside 3 times a day, get a protein at every meal, get the lights off at night, drink high quality water, preferably spring water, and have a social connection, have a social life. If you don't have that as the foundation of your life, and if you don't make some effort to manage stress, you're going to end up getting in trouble eventually. You might get on thyroid or you might get on whatever, and you might feel good for a while, but your house is built on sand, to steal something from the Bible. Those simple fundamental things that happen naturally, even as little as 1970, are gone. Most people spend 98% of their day indoors. Most people are spending way more time, including myself. I spend way too much time in front of the phone than I should because of the kind of work that I do. That's kind of one of the trade-offs that I make. But I'm doing a better job at managing that, especially when the sun goes down. And then, of course, I do things like, red lights and things like that in the background. I turn my screen red and things like that. But we have a huge tropical storm blowing through right now, or we'd be doing this on my patio. So most of my work I do outside. But I think naturally we had better social connection. We had, there was simpler food. It wasn't so processed. It was just a simpler life back then. And now we've made it too comfortable and too easy. We've got hyper palatable food. Our bodies are designed to eat as much as possible because food was never really available in the past in this much. And then we're designed to do as little as possible because we used to have to do tons of activity to keep ourselves in a good place. I watched we got caretakers here that take care of the property. They cut the grass here with machetes, like literally with machetes. All day they're hitting the machete. Do you know how hard that is? And we got one guy here, his job is to rake up all the mangoes and the avocados that fall down from the trees. He literally rakes all day and scoops up at least 8 wheelbarrows full of avocados and mangoes. And then he goes and loads them on a truck and we ship them off to wherever they ship them off to. He does that all day, every day from now until probably August. Talk about stress management. The body loves movement for stress management. That low level activity all day, every day. It's so good for your body, for your soul. That silence, that calmness. And I think our modern world has just completely robbed that from us.
It's funny you talk about the need to eat as much as possible due to caloric scarcity in the past. And it's funny, I read something to the effect of the amount of calories per person on the planet went from less than 2,400 or 2,200 or something like that to over 4,000 calories per person per day. And just by the sheer fact that all of those calories are now being made and companies don't want to not make a profit on those 4,000 calories, the diet for the average Western person has gone up by, what is that, 1,600 calories a day, just strictly based on the fact that that's how much food is being produced.
Well, and they're on purpose making the food hyper palatable and taking flavors that occur in nature that usually come with nutrition density. And like all the flavors in a Dorito, the body's like, oh my gosh, there's lime in here. There's all these great flavors that are generally associated with nutritional density, but it's empty. So the body eats the whole bag of Doritos and then it's like, does an inventory and is like, wait a minute, I didn't get any magnesium from that. I didn't get any vitamin C. I didn't get any of the essential nutrients. Keep the hunger button on. And then, of course, we got the constant attack on protein. The less protein you eat, your appetite is going to go through the ceiling. Protein is so with your satiety, not to mention people baking in blue light all day. Fake indoor lights really dysregulate blood sugar and cortisol. So you've got the combination of processed foods. The government is sponsoring the foods that make us sick. Like, why does a carrot cost more than a Twinkie? A carrot that grows in the ground costs more than something that's made in a factory. I mean, it's just ridiculous because everything in the Twinkie or the, whatever is subsidized by the government. The government's not subsidizing the healthy food. They're subsidizing the garbage. And then the pharmaceutical companies are just raking it in, right? So it's just a giant Ponzi scheme.
I think it's funny that you mentioned like the low level chronic stress in there too. And I've noticed this even a little bit in myself in that I have an Apple Watch, so I've been paying attention to a little bit more of my health data over the last year or so. And for as reliable as it can be, my HRV sits somewhere around 85 pretty steadily for the last year. And my normal resting heart rate over the entire year was somewhere around 59. So call it low 60s for a margin of error. And I would be the first person to admit that I am absolutely not living the healthiest lifestyle. But the one thing that I do think I have going for me is I live almost a zero stress lifestyle as much as I can, which is linked to my sort of low neuroticism. But that single factor can be attributed to the heart health benefits that I'm seeing through my wearable.
Yeah. I mean, if you read the book called The Great Cholesterol Myth, they studied a town in Pennsylvania where everybody was like drinking and smoking and eating all sorts of garbage food, but they had great social connection. And that's one of the reasons they didn't have any higher rates of heart disease. Actually, their rates of heart disease were better in healthier people that were healthier. The only thing I would caution you about, and I'm not trying to be a tool, is nuking your brain with those wireless headphones. I would probably caution you against that, the Bluetooth through your brain. And then if you're going to wear an Apple Watch, like I wear an Oura Ring, but I wear mine in airplane mode all day, so I don't have something broadcasting off my body. That would be the only things that I would politely point out to you.
For sure. What else? What else are we not paying enough attention to?
I just think being in touch with nature, circadian rhythm, making sure you get up. The sun runs your immune system, it runs your hormones, it runs everything, right? So getting light on your skin, we've been told, we've got people that are trying to block the sun. We've been told to stay out of the sun, and sun avoidance is the equivalent of cigarette smoking. So we need to get out in the sun. We need to get a tan. Obviously we don't want people to burn. I think silence, be still and know. People just don't sit quietly anymore. Going out in nature and sitting in nature and listening to the birds, being present, being in the moment, going for walks, not for exercise, but for leisure and relaxation. My good friend Joel Jameson, who has trained all sorts of professional athletes and MMA guys, and even myself with the people I've trained and the athletes I've trained over the years. Most people don't have a really hard time turning it on. Most people don't know how to turn it off, right? And so teaching people how to downregulate, how to relax, particularly after training, is super important.
So the resting more. Yeah, one of the more popular podcasts that I watch is Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson, and he's got this idea that he says that there's no such thing as being overworked, just underrested.
That's correct. And then underprepared too. Like most people will work all day sitting at a desk, hours and hours a week in a desk with no movement, no anything, and then they go and try and make up with 4 or 5 high intensity workouts a week and they haven't done anything to prepare them for it. So the biggest thing I can tell people, one simple thing you can do is put the tongue in the roof of your mouth, close your mouth, and just slowly breathe in and out through your nose. And it should be like you're not breathing at all. And the slower and the less you breathe, the more oxygen you'll actually absorb. We deal with this a lot in our practice in our coaching programs. People will have a ton of stress. Look at anxiety, they'll start feeling their neck, they'll start breathing with their neck muscles. It's just simple. If you're in the car, you're in Kroger, you're in Publix or Old Paycheck, wherever you are, put that tongue in the roof of the mouth, slow your breathing down. That will relax your traps. It'll take you out of that, high breathing strategy. And over time, like driving in your car, in the store, when you're listening on a call like this, or you're listening in an academic situation, you put that tongue in the roof of your mouth, you slow the breathing down. That's why teachers and hairdressers and people like that or coaches are so exhausted, or even me at the end of this call, is so exhausted at the end of the day, because you're talking the whole time and your mouth breathing the whole time, which revs you up. So when I get done with this call, I'm going to go sit out on my porch in my rocking chair. I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to close my mouth, I'm going to breathe through my nose, and I'm going to dial it down for about 10 minutes.
I think it's funny you talk about underprepared there too. And as I was prepping for the podcast, I was trying to figure out how I was going to meme this, but there's a phenomenon in mental health called the treatment prevalence paradox, which is just essentially that as our knowledge and the number of practitioners that is supposed to help people with depression has increased, we haven't seen the corresponding decrease in potential depression cases. So when you're talking about the underpreparedness there and the 5 to 6 workouts a week, and you're just doing 1 hour of intense exercise versus this low level manual labor that you're talking about with the guys that live there, this sort of idea of the almost treatment prevalence paradox, but for gyms and workouts. And like I said, I haven't come up with the way to meme this yet, but I think there's something there.
There is. How many gyms were there in the 1950s?
I don't know.
How many women
Probably
worked
not.
out in the 1950s? None. There was very, very little. It was just it was fringe, bodybuilders and Olympic lifters and some athletes, some really goofy strongman type stuff, but there wasn't a gym on every corner. How many women worked out in the 1950s? They didn't work out.
Again,
it was unfeminine.
probably close to none.
Most women's schools in the 1950s didn't even have women's sports, right? Marilyn Monroe was one of the first women that actually started strength training, and there were not any obese people. So now we've got a gym on every corner, a personal trainer on every corner, and there's an epidemic of obesity. Same principle.
What's the inverse of all this? What do people make into big things that they shouldn't be?
It's a really good question. I think that's highly individual. I think that's a really great question. I think a lot of people they get caught up in one thing. They kind of get fixated on one thing. They'll get fixated on a certain supplement or a certain protocol instead of worrying about the health of the whole system, right? They'll get focused on one thing. Say your tires are wearing out on your car and you're like, oh my God, I got to get a better tire. And they don't realize that the frame is bent on the car, or the car has a bad wheel alignment. There's nothing wrong with the tire, right? It just needs a wheel alignment. So a lot of times people also, I would say one of the biggest things people ignore is their own mental health and the relationship they have with themselves. A lot of people have a really terrible, including myself, at a young age. A lot of the stuff that I've done was to please other people, was to fill in voids of insecurity, was to deal with anger and resentment that I had that I needed to deal with, but I didn't deal with it. So I used strength training, I used sports to distract myself. So a lot of people just don't have a good relationship with themselves, and then they get caught up in an activity like working out or bad relationships or whatever to basically try and manage themselves from that. I don't think a lot of people slow down enough to really take a hard look at themselves. And including myself, for years, I blamed other people. I made excuses when really I needed to take ownership for myself. I think that's a big thing a lot of people miss. A lot of people just aren't willing to take an honest look at themselves. And that's where you have a coach. I was on a call with a lady the other day, and she was actually in a group call, and she talked about how the first time I met her, I've talked to so many people. I'm really good at interviewing people and seeing kind of what they're, what's going on. I can usually pick people out, and I've talked to enough people. I can usually figure what people are like. And this poor girl, she's running around with a chicken with her head cut off, busy mom, trying to be a career girl plus workout. And I'm just like, girl, you need to chill. Like, you can tell when somebody's talking, when they're just like, it's just like machine gun, right? She didn't pause. She didn't take her time. I said, you really need to chill. And she shared on the group call the other day that the first call she had with me, like the assessment call, and I basically gave her some breathing drills. I told her she needed to go outside. I told her she needed to walk and relax and, put the tongue over her mouth and relax and make more time for her. Put the oxygen mask on herself before, and she's trying to take care of everyone around her while, she's falling apart. She was like, I was really mad. Like, who is this guy to tell me he doesn't know me? How does he know? And then she's like, about a week later, after I basically like beat the heck out of me in her head, she's like, he's right. I'm completely out of control. I am burning the candle at both ends, and I need to take better care of myself. So it's interesting. A lot of people don't want to hear the truth. They don't want the mirror shine in their face, including myself. I've dealt with that. So that's, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of where my brain went.
How would you advise people take more ownership of their own life?
That's a good question. Well, just take ownership. Like, stop blaming other people. That's the one thing I learned about owning a business was, I would blame everyone else. And I'm like, really, what am I doing? Like, I'm throwing my team members under the bus. I really need to accept ownership and be like, take responsibility, because that way you own it and you can change it. If you blame other people, then you're just pushing it off. And I've done that. I did that for most of my life. I blamed other people. I blamed my parents. I blamed relationships. And then, one day you sit down and you go, well, this keeps happening over and over again. The people are changing, but I'm the same variable. So maybe I need to like take care of my own stuff, right? And so I always, when I was working, I started learning how to, okay, maybe I didn't explain it well enough. Maybe I need to do a better job of communicating. Maybe I didn't give the person the right job, right? Maybe I did a poor selection. But the same thing is to go with health, like, okay, why do I keep abusing myself? Why don't I value myself? Why am I not treating myself better? Do I have a good relationship with myself? Why do I keep driving my body like a stolen car, right? And that's where things like neurofeedback, EMDR therapy, talking to the right person, because a lot of times we get addicted to feeling a certain way, and then we start using food, we start using chemicals, drug, relationships to get that feeling. We're so used to being revved up, or, a lot of people will get addicted to drama in their relationships, so they'll cause drama to get that spun up feeling. And you really need help to learn how to downregulate and relax your brain so that you don't need that fix, right? And so a lot of people are just live a life of distraction. And I did that for a long time. And I still struggle with it. I catch myself scrolling through history videos every once in a while, just killing time. I'm like, why am I doing this? Like, there's so many better things I could be doing right now, right? Like getting ready for bed. So basically just owning your own crap. That's, I think, is a big part of it. Whereas a lot of people just make excuses or, what am I doing today to get better? I think if people just said, hey, is this activity making me better or worse or the same? And what is the positives? What is the negatives? And is it neutral? What's going to be the trade-off or the cost of this? And is it going to make me better, more resilient in the long run? Or if it isn't, I'm just going to accept the fact that this isn't a very wise activity right now, but I really want to do it anyway. So I'm going to eat the whole cheesecake, and I'm sure as hell going to enjoy it, right? Or the carrot. I would prefer carrot cake, but
yeah, when you're talking about blaming other people as part of that, it sort of, obviously this is an inherent thing that I know, but I had never really thought about it in the framing that as soon as you start blaming other people, you relinquish your own ability to actually fix the problem yourself. Because when you blame others, you're automatically giving them the highest authority on whatever the mistake or problem is. And obviously this is like one of the key tenets of society at the moment is like, how can we blame ourselves the least and shove all of our problems onto as many other people as possible? And I think that's why everybody's so sort of miserable, because they've relinquished all of their ability to fix their problems to somebody else in their life. I don't know who originally this quote gets attributed to, but it's like, if you're waiting for people in Washington, D.C. to fix your life, you're going to be waiting for a long fucking time. So just, I love that, what you said, what am I doing today to get better? Like, just find that. The gentleman that I interviewed earlier this week was like, what's the next right thing?
And a lot of times it's a baby step. A lot of times it's like, I'm just going to go outside and sit in the sun for 5 minutes instead of sitting here and staring at my TV, right? A lot of times it's like, I'm going to pick the chicken. I'm going to eat chicken and a vegetable. And instead of having a Pop-Tart, you make that decision enough times in the day. That the cool thing is, a lot of these things, like little hinges swing really big doors. So like getting out in the morning, getting your morning light, that's become, popular. I've been talking about this for a long time. That morning light stimulates cortisol, stimulates thyroid, stimulates all your hormones. It sets your clock. It stabilizes your blood sugar. It gets you going. You end up feeling better. Okay. And so you get your hormones, you get your clock set, then you get out at noon, and then you come home in the evening and you get the lights off at night. And then all of a sudden you start sleeping better. So, your blood sugar is more regulated. Your hormones are better balanced. And all of a sudden, because you're getting a good night's sleep, you're not craving the chocolate cake. You're not craving the wine. Your sleep gets even better. And then all of a sudden you're building this momentum of good habits. Whereas most people, it's like, okay, they get up, they turn their phone on, boom, they're staring at it first thing in the morning. They're in their office all day in front of their screen. They're drinking, soda or whatever, and they're eating like whatever they eat, Pop-Tarts, whatever the deal is. Their blood sugar is like a roller coaster all over the place. They're not eating enough protein. And then they feel like garbage at the end of it. So they're drinking coffee throughout the day. They feel like garbage. At the end of the day, they're just frazzled, so they have a couple glasses of wine to relax and go to bed. That makes their sleep even worse, and it just kind of spirals out of control. The sleep gets out of control, their appetite and their craving for junk food goes up, and it just the bad habits compound. You have to replace some of those bad habits with good habits, and the good habits will compound. And then if you make the good habits a part of your life, when things go to shit, you have the good habits to fall back on, and you don't double down on the bad habits, because that's what happens to most people, right? I got in a really bad car wreck 2 years ago. I could barely walk. I had a head injury, and I was living in Santa Rosa Beach. I didn't really know anybody. I literally just crawled on my hands and knees out to my patio and just sat there in the sun a couple times a day. I'd have to take my dog out to go to the bathroom, but that's about all I could do. And I just started with that, and I just slowly built up and built, I had already had those habits of walking outside 3 times a day, doing all those things. I had to regress them back a little bit. But because I had those habits already established, even though I was in a really bad place, it was still easy for me to just at least get outside. And that really helped speed up my recovery. And as I got better, I started crawling around on the floor. I started doing some rehab on the floor, and then I started walking again. And then I started getting myself in a better place. So having those fundamental habits are really important, because when things go bad, are you going to double down on your good habits, or are you going to double down on your bad habits? And usually when we're coaching people and they're like, yeah, I've been really struggling for the last 2 weeks. Okay, what happened? Well, my kid, got in trouble at school, or my kid's girlfriend dumped, my kid is mad at me, or, my husband's mad at me, or something happened and it really stressed me out. It's affected my sleep. And I started having a couple cocktails, and now, I don't feel as good. I'm not sleeping as good. I've gained some weight, and I'm like, well, you got to go back to the basics, start, make sure you're getting your protein, make sure you cut that alcohol down, get out in the morning, get your sleep in order, manage your stress. And a lot of people they fall off the wagon because they start medicating themselves with food, with alcohol, or with whatever, instead of making, the better choice. You don't have to be perfect, but the problem is when you repeatedly medicate yourself with things that just make you feel better temporarily, usually in the long run, it doesn't end up working out very well.
Yeah, James Clear has this quote that says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So
it's very true.
I heard you and Dr. Stillman talking about the fact that vitamin D functions more like a hormone than it does a vitamin. And that's the first time I've ever heard that. What do
Sure.
most people not know about vitamin D?
Well, one, that you need it to make testosterone, and you need cholesterol to make it too, and then it's only one part of sun exposure, right? And it's just a huge. I mean, I'd say the two. We actually talked about this. We had a thing called we do a webinar every week. They have to be on our email list to get in. But this week was on actually yesterday, or what's today? Friday. Yes, yesterday. Iodine secrets, and him and I both agreed that there's two chronic deficiencies that we think are really driving things. Well, one of them is sunshine, right, which ties in with vitamin D. But vitamin D deficiency tied in with iodine deficiency, because most people are iodine deficient, and vitamin D deficient. It's just absolutely wrecking havoc on people. So, I mean, I can't speak about the details of vitamin D like somebody like Dr. Stillman can, but the sun just runs. I mean, nitric oxide is a humongous thing that the sun provides for us. Why are people's blood pressures going up all over the world? Well, people aren't going outside anymore. And so you produce nitric oxide by being out in the sun. You get beta endorphins from being out in the sun. Why are people craving more stimulants or craving more uppers, craving more dopamine? We're designed to get a lot of our dopamine from the sun, right? And we're not doing that. We're getting it from other things. So, and part of the sex steroid hormones too, that vitamin D and that cholesterol is super important in that. And what do we talk about all the time, right? Don't eat animal products, your cholesterol will go up. We really get that cholesterol down. You really need more sun, and you need more real food. And so I think the two biggest lies, that's the biggest lie, I think, now, is how bad the sun is for you, when the reality is the complete opposite.
Yeah, I think my understanding is that the exposure to sun can increase skin cancer risk, but also simultaneously lowers all-cause mortality. So pick your poison.
Including in skin cancer, yes.
What is I don't know if you can speak to this like you're saying, but what's the sort of core mechanism behind that deficiency combo with the iodine and vitamin D?
Well, iodine just drives, reproductive organs. Like every cell in the body requires iodine, right? And we don't have as much iodine in the soil. People are not eating seafood as much. People are taking in copious amounts of fluoride, which really affect that. They're brushing their teeth with fluorinated toothpaste. They're drinking tons of fluorinated water. If you go to Dr. Stillman's YouTube channel, you can look up, and he talks about a lot of this stuff in detail. And you look at the beer bug that just happened. The majority of the people that had, morbidity from that was people with low vitamin D status. So, I mean, if you go in and you type circadian rhythm and cancer, circadian rhythm and heart disease, circadian rhythm or vitamin D and heart disease, vitamin D and autoimmune disease, it's insane. And like the closer you get to the equator, like things like multiple sclerosis go away. Things like rheumatoid arthritis go away as you get closer to the equator. So, vitamin D, the sun, all these things. And that's why, traditional cultures had things like sweat lodges and saunas and things like that to make up for the lack of sun in the winter. And they would eat really fatty fish from cold water to get that vitamin D as well. And then in the summer, the sun would be up, almost 24 hours a day, so they could build their vitamin D stores up. But it's just such a huge, I can't remember Dr. Stillman and I we actually did a webinar too on skin cancer, where we talk about the number of people that die of melanoma every year. I think it's about 12,000. And most of that you can get cut out as you see it. And I believe personally, I'm not a doctor, obviously, I think fake light is contributing more to skin cancer than the sun, because the sun has red in it, which is part of the healing part of the spectrum. Whereas the blue bulbs are only blue, which are highly inflammatory. And if you look at countries like England and as people have moved indoors, the rates of skin cancer have absolutely skyrocketed. And as they've taken away incandescent bulbs, because incandescent bulbs have red in them, the incidence of skin cancer has gone through the ceiling. So I think the fake light is really driving the skin cancer, because most people spend more time in their underwear in front of Netflix than they do on the beach, right? So that's kind of my theory on that. And you talked about the all-cause mortality. That's true with even people with melanoma. People with melanoma have better outcomes when they get more sun exposure. So that's just, and actually like having multiple sunburns actually lowers your risk of heart disease and and like cancer. So it's wild, So there's just a lot of real basic things that are simple that our modern indoor life has really taken away from us. And the combination of them is just incredibly deadly.
I would definitely be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that I can't be completely unbiased on the subject, given that my wife has had a melanoma cut out of her at 26, 27. So I'm certainly hopeful that we will get more research in the area that can help us sort of untangle where all of this stuff is coming from. And I'm like definitely hopeful that we can sort of come to a better consensus than it seems like we've come to now.
I agree. Well, there's a lot of, if you look at the dermatology research, and Dr. Stillman gets into a lot of this, their own research is really, really inconsistent as far as the conclusions they come to. So it's very interesting. But I would say the biggest mistake that modern humans make with the sun is they basically don't go out enough in the morning and they don't go out enough in the evening. And then they just go out in the peak of the afternoon. And it's kind of like running a marathon without training for it. Because the morning and the evening is what prepares your skin for the afternoon sun.
That's a good analogy. I like that analogy. For as much as the small anecdote is worth, I was moving shingles around a couple weekends ago, and definitely spent a lot of time in the morning sun without some sunscreen, and then was out in the afternoon for a couple hours, again, without any sunscreen. Did put a shirt on, but was out there for a couple hours and definitely got significantly less pink than I normally would, given the fact that I was out in the middle of the day for a couple hours. So.
Well, if you're consistently out every morning and every evening, you can take an obnoxious amount of afternoon sun because your body just builds resistance and builds a solar callus up to it. And people here, they get too much sun, they just go in the shade. So Western culture tends to I think sunscreen also brings a false sense of security. Not alone the amount of junk that's in it, but you give it to kids and stuff and they're like, I've got 50, this protects me. And they spend way too much time in the sun because they have this mental block in their head that, oh, this stuff's going to protect me. It's kind of like wearing a football helmet, right? When you're playing football and you got all this equipment on, you're going to lead with your head and you're going to hit a lot harder. But if you're playing rugby, you kind of tackle a little bit differently if you've ever played the different sports. So I think a lot of times people get a false sense of security because they've got this stuff on them.
What don't people understand in acute versus chronic stress?
Well, define what you mean by acute.
Short-term bursts of difficult activity or burdensome scenarios in their life.
Well, those are part of life. Those need to be a part of your life. You need to have, where you're doing some sprinting, or if you're prepared, or say you've got a very heated discussion, but those go away. The chronic stress is you've got mold in your attic, or you've got a mother-in-law living with you who's an absolute nightmare, or, you're working at a job that you hate, or you're working too many hours. The difference between the chronic stress is kind of like Chinese water torture. And then the acute stress is like training is an acute stress. You put a specific amount of stress on you and then it goes away and then you rest and then you come back and your body adapts to it, right? The chronic stress is more of a eating away at things, right? It erodes over time. And so when you're under constant chronic stress, you're eroding the system, you're eroding digestion, you're eroding sex steroid hormones, all that stuff. Whereas the acute stress actually increases testosterone, increases these hormones. There's a picture of a World War II soldier in Russia who went into the war, if you Google it, so he went into the war at 17 or 18 years old. And he was in Stalingrad, I think. And he was a great looking kid. And then you looked at him 4 years later and he looked like he was in his 40s because he spent the most of the war in Stalingrad eating paint chips and drinking vodka. Not a great place to spend time. And you can just see what it did to him. If you look at the president of the United States, if you look at somebody like Barack Obama or Bill Clinton or these people, what they look like when they entered the presidency versus when they left the presidency, it's insane. They aged so much in that 4 years. I won't comment about the current one. But that's what that chronic stress does, day after day after day. And I think the low-level chronic stress is much more dangerous to us than the acute. because our society today has a lot more chronic stress.
Where could we be wrong about all this? These are the people. This is just a naturalistic fallacy. It's an appeal to nature. You're just stuck in this old nostalgic time. Where could we be wrong about all this?
I don't know. You can't cheat Mother Nature forever. Like any time in history where humans have tried to play God, it's never ended well, right? So I think technology is great. I just think we need to be like the Native Americans and learn how to work with nature instead of like basically instead of working with nature. Like, why are all these screens blue? You can go down some deep rabbit holes and get into like the CIA and all this stuff and the patents on the blue screens. And originally, from what I've heard, it was basically slot machine people in Vegas figured out that blue lights get your dopamine way up, and then they black out the sun, and then they bring girls in with pretty drinks, and they got a slot machine there that's all lights flashing. And a lot of the social media was designed on that same premise. So it's all about you becoming a complacent, compliant consumer. So, do you want to be like Wall-E? What book was that? Wall-E, the guy in the chair with the feeding tube, and
yeah, it was a Disney movie, I think. Pixar movie.
Yeah. So, I look at like the work of Weston A. Price, and I look at traditional cultures, hunter-gatherer cultures like the Maasai, the Inuit, that lived long. If they didn't die in childbirth, or they didn't like die of a massive trauma, they lived in their 80s and 90s, and they looked really good. They weren't wearing a diaper. They aged gracefully. They had perfect teeth. A lot of people don't understand that there's a lot of hunter-gatherer type tribes in the world that had great life expectancy. They had beautiful teeth, beautiful jaw lines, living a very simple life. And there's no reason why we couldn't take the technology that we have and integrate it with nature and have a much better outcome. I think the Amish are a pretty good example of that. I mean, obviously they're very, very basic, but they have much better health outcomes, less obesity, less heart disease. Their kids don't have massive autoimmune diseases. They don't have autism. They don't have things like that. I guess it's just, you got to pick your poison, right? It's like, I'm on this call with you. That's not normal. That's not natural, but I'm willing to do that. It's part of the things that allow me to live the life that I want to live. So I'm choosing to use the technology and not like the technology used me. But I think one of the biggest mistakes people can make is overstress about too many things. Like, I'm really careful with EMF. I don't think it's great. I think it'd be designed much better. But if you start getting people like overwhelmed with that stuff, I mean, I've seen people like get so freaked out about it that it just creates a massive stressor, and they're just running around like the stuff's being beamed down from space. So the way I look at it is like, control what you can control. Like, unplug your Wi-Fi router at night, hardwire your stuff if you can. But why don't we work on being more resilient as opposed to like freaking out about building an iron box in the ground, right? Food and things like that. Like, focus on getting out in the sun, improving your health, as opposed to like avoiding every, like, I'm not going to eat glutens. I'm not going to eat nightshades. I'm not going to eat like, all these things are stressors. But a lot of people, I think, create a huge, they make it a lot worse than it could be because they stress about it so much, right? So there's a fine line there between becoming a hypochondriac, and the stress actually becomes worse than the stress itself, and just not giving two F's. And, I'm going to brush my teeth with fluoride toothpaste, and I'm going to bathe in turpentine or whatever, so there needs to be a middle ground. But I think we've had people that I've worked with that were so hyper-focused on their health, so hyper-focused on their calories, that it was creating a massive problem for them. And it was becoming like almost like a mental disorder. I was just like, dude, just go have some pizza and beer like once a week. Like, go out with your friends. And for them, they needed that, like, oh, it's okay for me to have a beer every once in a while. It's okay for me to have pizza. Other people, they do that and they go completely off the rails and they never recover, right? So a lot of it is you got to get to know yourself. And part of that is being present enough to know what you can handle and what you can't handle, right? So you don't go into like reptile monkey mode, where you go into that side of your brain that's just survival instinct, and then, 3 bags of chips disappear and you don't know what happened,
I have one final question that I like to ask all my guests, and that's, what's the last opinion or belief that you changed your mind about?
The last opinion or belief that I changed my mind about. It's very interesting. Let me think about that for a second. I wish you would have told me this ahead of time. This is good. This is really good. What's the last opinion or belief that I changed my mind about? I've changed my mind about a bunch of things in the last little while. What's yours?
I think for me, the latest one that I keep coming back to is the idea that potentially there is room that therapy isn't actually for everyone, and that we're actively making a subset of people worse by making them focus on negative emotions that they need to tell to a therapist every week.
I would agree with that. I think that's why I value EMDR therapy with the right therapist, because it's about dealing with it and putting it behind you. It's not about coming in and regurgitating the same information over and over. It's about expressing it, getting it out, and putting it behind you. I think one of the worst things you can do is have a therapist affirm you every week instead of challenging you and making you put things behind you and accepting things and forgiving people. So that's a great point. Think about that for a second. What have I changed my mind about? That's a really good question. I really appreciate that question. What have I changed my mind about? Well, I think one of the big ones was earlier in my life, I thought I was invincible. When I was younger, I thought I was indestructible. I thought I was, almost superhuman, that I could do anything I wanted to do. And I learned that I couldn't be. That was a big part of it. I think another thing I've changed my mind on is that I really don't have any control on anything that happens other than what I can control directly myself on a day-to-day basis. Like, there's nothing I can do. The system and the machine is so big and it's such a monster. The best way for me to even worry about that, or I used to think I could make a difference in that department. But the only way to really make a difference in the world is to basically worry about what's right in front of you instead of like the stuff you can't control. Like what's going on in Russia, or what's going on in Iraq, or what's going on in Israel, or what's going on with Bitcoin or whatever else. You need to be aware of these things. I used to get so caught up in all that and argue about politics with people and things like that, but it really doesn't. It's a giant video game at this point, right? So that's probably one of the biggest things. I don't get into discussions about that stuff. I just treat people well and really focus on improving the quality of my everyday life and the quality of the life of the people around me. And I try to just let the video game do its thing. And I'm aware of the video game, but I don't get sucked into the video game, if that makes sense.
Jim, this has been great. I appreciate you joining me for the last hour. If we want to send people somewhere to find out more about the coaching or all the stuff that you do, where can we send them?
Well, I'm on Instagram at Jim Laird, GYM, because my gym used to be called Jim Laird. Never name a gym after yourself, right? That way it's really hard to sell when you do that. Don't do that. So it's not good. And then, of course, I work with Dr. Leland Stillman. You can go to stillmanwellness.com. We do a live on YouTube every Monday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. And then we do our webinar, which you have to be on our email list. We do that every Thursday at 10. So,
Jim, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. You asked some really great questions.